So the problem is all these they're sitting on big paper losses, right? Capital losses on all the bonds they bought that are supposed to be safe. And they're looking to recapitalize themselves. They're looking to fill that hole in their balance sheet. And the regulators are like, go ahead.
Keith Weiner, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Andy. How about you?
Doing good. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm quite the admirer from afar from your work and your discussions. And what I really want to there's a lot of things I want to pick your brain about, but let's start out just the general macro view of the economy, where we're at and where we're going. What are your thoughts?
You know what? The backdrop to all of this, to really understand this, that live in a very unnatural and artificial regime, which is the regime of irredeemable currency. And, for the first time, the whole world has gone mad, has gone all in on this, scheme. And, you have a couple of problems with irredeemable currency. The interest rate is unstable. It skyrocketed through the 1970s up to about 1981. It was basically falling ever since. I argue that all the drivers for why it's falling are continuing to fall. I'm sorry, continuing to be in full force and effect. It will continue to fall, notwithstanding the attempt to fight the tide. And the reason is, you can't pay off a debt. Currency debt. So if you pay off a debt, you're just shifting it around. So all the debt accumulates. And the professor I studied under, a guy named Fekete, used the analogy of, imagine if you threw the garbage in the attic, and every day, you'd open the hatch to try to put more garbage in there. Well, eventually, it all comes down on you. And those are the little crises we have. But in the meantime, just the weight of all that bearing down, it just becomes heavier and heavier and heavier. I wrote an article called the heat death of the economic universe, talking about the everything about what we're diminishing. That is the same additional buck that's borrowed at the margin produces a diminishing effect of adding GDP to the economy. And of course, once there, the interest on it has to be serviced forever. So it adds, less and less boost, which is a one-shot boost. And that just adds its weight to all the rest of the anchors dragging on everything. So, everything just becomes more and more frictional, more and more lethargic. And so the debt has to grow exponentially in order to keep any semblance of, or pretense, I should say, of economic normalcy. And that's the world that we're in. And every time the government makes business harder, I don't know, by, let's say, locking everybody down, destroying supply chains, destroying whole industries, whole swathes of the economy. And then just as we're recovering, from that, first of all, there's a whiplash effect, but then governments around the world imposing green energy restrictions, and then tariffs, and not just tariffs, but trade war. If you're in the semiconductor industry, you'd have to be terrified to have any part of your supply chain going to Asia right now. So that's a massive, frictional force for those guys to have to recreate all the capacity they have in Asia all over again in the US. Onshoring or nearshoring, obviously a lot of it goes to Mexico. Um, Enormous amounts of capital diverted from something else that could be additive to the economy to simply replace, that which already exists. And
Right.
that's the backdrop, right? So everything about the deployment can go up or down, stock market can go up or down. All of that has to be understood in this context. That it's not, as the Keynesians say, and I think most people sort of accept today, well, the stock market goes up and GDP goes up, based on animal spirit. If people feel good, so everyone's like, they should shut up talking about inflation because they're going to trigger inflation. Talk doesn't trigger this. It's not about feelings. It's not about sentiment. It's about real things that are going on. Everybody always wants to make more money. Everybody always wants to consume more. But there's times when credit is easily flowing, and everybody and everything is dependent on not just credit, but ever increasing amounts of increasing credit. And when that's flowing freely and accelerating freely, you got what passes for growth nowadays. And when that, then terrible, terrible thing, happen, and then the Fed call, and interest rates will be slammed back down to zero much faster than they were hiked.
I like how you brought that back all the way around full circle, because I think this is very dependent. When I mean this, the economy, you can say GDP, you can even say the world economy, really, and what we live in is really interest rate sensitive or driven by interest rates. And you're in this camp that is very interest rates more than likely have peaked. Even the long-term yields have peaked. Am I saying that correct?
Yeah, I mean, look at the 10-year Treasury. For all this talk of maybe we'll hike them more and whatever, you know, did we see 4.6? I know we saw 4.5 something. We're now 4.2.
Yeah.
People say, oh, well, the bond market, conflicting with the stock market, the bond market is right. Not that people in the bond market are expressing, they're not stock market speculators. They're not making a bet. It's not like the bears versus the bulls and who's right. That what's driving the world is credit. And you see, everybody should be excited when they find an indicator that's, much more difficult to manipulate. Though, I mean, the short-term interest.
Made me laugh. You're right. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so imagine a perverse game where every time there's an indication, let's say that one team is winning, they change the rules and they remove that from let's say it's baseball and, one team is scoring more runs. So they just take runs off the scoreboard. It's not about runs anymore. And so you just can't see it right. So, that dictates the overnight rate. That's administered by the central planners. And I make enemies when I say it's central planning.
I like the way you say central planners. I would agree.
Some folks would argue, wrongfully, I would add, but they would argue that, well, it's not central planning. If you go into each individual industry and each individual company and pick individual winners and losers, Microsoft is going to win, Google is going to lose. That's central planning. But what the Fed is doing, you see, that's not just central planning. That's, whatever market monetarism or whatever the hell term they want to coin for it at the moment. Central planning, right? The bureaucrats sit around and decide what the rate should be.
Right.
And every while when something comes out about how that process occurs, it reminds me of I think it was an Atlas Shrugged where Ayn Rand said this, that person expected to find this evil giant, that was behind the whole thing. And when he got there, there was like a fog. And then when he got through the fog, it was a nest of roaches scurrying, for away from the light. Whenever any kind of sunlight penetrates how these people are making these decisions, it's a little better than numerology, astrology, sheep entrails, eye of newt. I mean, it's really, really pathetic. Hunches, kinds of things. And which everybody is forced to be Kremlin watchers. I remember under Greenspan.
That's so true.
When you go to the meeting and he carried this briefcase, which was one of those old leather satchels, and he didn't have a lot of papers in there, and everyone knew that his habit was, if there was going to be a change in interest rate, he'd bring the document that would prove his point. And if he didn't bring any documents or didn't bring a lot of documents, then he wasn't going to try to change. So the people, like paparazzi, or like, when Chevrolet is rumored to have a new Corvette, all these guys are out there with a, big telephoto lenses trying to get a glimpse, and they disguise the car in camouflage and all that. They're out there trying to get a shot of his briefcase on his way to the meeting. And but it was behind it all is a bunch of rubbish, because these guys don't know what the right interest rate is. But just know what the right interest rate is. But they make it up and they administer it. So the point is, you can't look at the overnight funds rate as an indicator of anything, because they've replaced the signal with, somebody just pressing a button or turning a knob. But when you look at the longer term rate, the Fed has a lot of influence on longer term rates, but it's kind of counterintuitive, and it's not a nice linear direct, relationship, like, oh, they're buying bonds and therefore bond prices go up. That's not true.
Right.
The Fed was bonds in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, and rates were going up, bond prices were going down. So anyway, you look at the price of the 10-year Treasury going up in the face of all this, i.e. the interest rate going down, and so we have this massively inverted yield curve. What is that saying? That's saying there's something wrong in the economy.
Right.
People turn it into tarot card kind of thing. Well, if the yield curve is inverted, that doesn't mean anything by itself. But when it uninverts, then that's the harbinger of inflation, blah, 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 blah. It kind of reverse the cart and the horse. That, the reason why it uninverts, because finally the Fed panics. The Fed sees something going wrong in the economy they care about. By the way, they don't care if you have a job or not. And they don't care if the prices are going up at the grocery store. That's all, charade or pretext or whatever, window dressing, whatever term you want to put on that. But they do care about the solvency of the banks. So when
Yeah.
the third falls coming and whatever, then they react and slam the interest rate to zero. But of course, it's always too late. And harbinger of recession, right? But it's not the uninversion that caused, or even early the signal, the final effect of when the Fed is slamming rates to zero, you get the uninversion, because now the short end of the curve goes to zero, the long end of the curve is 4%. Gets uninverted, right? What to do. That's just a mechanical thing. But what is causing the Fed to do that? Damage is finally penetrating through the wall of the ivory tower, penetrating through heads, and they finally realize, oh, beep, something's going on here that we better address.
Got it. Let's talk about that. I want to lean on the yield curve there. And you just mentioned banks. Something happens when the banks are insolvent, or what you just said is that the Fed doesn't really, a lot of us, they don't care about but what they do care about is bank solvency or insolvency, if you would. And my question is, how are banks then making any money with the yield curve that's been inverted? I want to say for about, if my memory serves me correctly, it's over 12 months. It's been over 12 months. I want to say, roll right at 12 months. How are they making any money? And my second question is, how does this affect corporate debt? Because that must put a lot of strain on corporate debt. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So we did on our podcast, we did a show called, or a series of shows called Zombie Month for October, in honor of Halloween, but also in honor of
Halloween.
So Zombie is a company whose profits are less than its interest. In other words, it can't even afford, forget repaying the debt. It can't even afford to service it. It can't even pay the, before interest rates were going up, the data that was coming out of the Bank for International Settlements and other sources pegged at around 20% of all corporate debt was zombie debt. 20%.
8%.
That's nothing. Now that was when the Fed funds rate was essentially zero, and then they raised it to essentially 5.5. And so, at that time, if a zombie was able to borrow at 3%, now they're borrowing at 8.5 or something. Well, how many more companies at this interest rate are zombie, or rendered zombie by simply raising the bar that much? Versus then. Well, I haven't seen any new data come out yet, sort of post interest rate hikes. I guess that data is probably due soon. Then we'll see what it looks like. But you'd have to think of that, essentially they've moved the margin, and zombies are the ones that are beneath the margin. You've moved the margin up 5.5%. That's a big deal, and there's a lot more companies. When companies have to roll, they may find they can't. The market doesn't want to lend them anymore. Or if they can, they're really going to pay, obviously the market interest rate, which is a lot higher now. And that higher interest rate itself is going to contribute further to their zombification and, and ultimately demand.
Yeah.
You're right. When you used to have the banks make money, banks in this regime, it's not normal for banks, but I think this regime is normal, exist to borrow short to lend long. And, when you're borrowing short at 5.5 and lending long at 4.5, it's a problem. And then on top of that, the banks, because they were encouraged all during, let's say 2020 and 2021, they're encouraged to load up on Treasury bonds at record high prices, i.e. record low interest rates, to make sure everybody watching this understands. The interest rate and the bond price are soft. They're strict mathematical inverse. Interest rates rising means bond price falling and vice versa. So since peak price of the 10-year Treasury in midsummer 2020, that bond fell about 25% in market value. So imagine you buy shares of some company at 100 and it goes down to 75.
Yeah.
That's kind of a big deal, especially if you borrowed 99 in order to buy that thing at 100, and then it goes down to 75. So then
Yeah.
your balance sheet now is minus 24. So then the banks say, okay, well, no problem. Uh, I put that in scare quotes. 2008 crisis was when they announced that banks don't have to mark their assets to market anymore. So you can take that thing that's worth 75 and you can keep it on your books at 100 and pretend it's worth 100, which is what, I don't know, Silicon Valley Bank was doing.
Yeah.
And then, baby boomer expression, which I just think is so iconic of that generation. I'm not baby boomer. I'm a proud member of Gen X.
Me too.
For anybody who cares. But the expression is not a problem until it's a problem.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the philosophy of an ostrich, I suppose. It's there with its head buried beneath the sand, and it's not a problem until somebody comes along and kicks it, and then you know what? Then it's a problem. You can write on your books anything you want. Paper does not refuse the aim, but it's not true. In fact, the reality is you're actually insolvent, and you pretend otherwise. So the difference, and I said this on a few interviews I've done recently. The Fed today, the Powell would say that the Bernanke 2008 Fed would leap at the helm. They were negligent, they were stupid, they were not stupid, but they were slow, they were not proactive, and they allowed all this stuff to happen. Well, one thing on that, the other thing is that there was some semblance of rules that the Fed had to go through. That today, rules have been kicked to the curb and thrown out the window. And the Fed by comparison is like hyper proactive. That the Fed is just jumping on top of every little thing before it becomes and so I like to talk about the spread between junk bonds and treasuries.
Yes, please.
The overall interest rate trend is one thing, but if you can change between two different credit instruments, that may give you more information than the interest rate trend itself. So we all know interest rates are gone up. Okay, fine. Some economists say that's going to be the end of the world. Other economists say it's fine. It's not a problem. MMT, modern monetary theory, people are saying, well, that's just a subsidy for rich people. Like they totally don't get anything if it's not written in Mark or Mossler, not in their content, they don't get it. But that interest rate expense has gone way, way up for everybody. But you should see a difference between junk bonds and treasury bonds. Oh, one other thing there's a lot of people in the gold and alternative investing communities pointing to the Feds or the treasuries, the federal government's rising interest rate payment obligation. They look at this, the government's going to crash. It's going to default. And they're literally the last entity in the world to default. That is, every other entity in the world will default first. All 50 state governments, all the foreign governments, all the banks, all the foreign banks, all the domestic corporations, all the foreign corporations, all the homeowners, all the car buyers, all the student loans, all the credit cards, all the small business debt. That's all headed to default long before the federal government should default. They're the guys with the printing press.
Right.
Everyone laughed to their magic. So anyway, so there's the spreads, junk rated credits, pay higher interest rates than the U.S. government, obviously. So you can look at the spread between the two. And the spread right now just simply hasn't really moved. I mean, during COVID, when everyone thought, oh my God, these companies are headed to default, before all the bailouts and the stimulus and everything else, spread was about 10 percentage points. That is, they were paying 10 percentage points more interest rate versus the federal government. The peak of the crisis at 08, it hit around 20.
Yeah.
3.2 right now. Literally saying nothing. Now, I don't think that's because there's no stress for junk rated credit. I think they're all really struggling. But I think because somebody has found a way to, shall we say, put their thumb on the scales. And, I've talked about this a few times. I think, among other things, I don't know if the Fed is actually buying any of it.
I was going to ask that.
Giving themselves the power to do something. Discussion as to whether they are or aren't at the moment. But, a friend of mine that I golf with, I try to do it as often as possible. It's like 3 or 4 times a year. Um, you know, he and I, every time we got together for golf, he's like, so what's the answer to the dilemma? Why the spread not widening? Why is it not blowing out? And every time we get together, like on the first tee shot, it's like, I'd go hit my ball or meth kick maybe or whatever, it's off in the trees. And so what's the answer to that dilemma? Which we both knew what the context was because we were so obsessed. And then I got together with him about a year ago, September, coming back from a long trip. We finally got out on the golf course, and I think I have the answer. So he's in the investment advisory business, does a lot of annuities and insurance products, and was talking with the back office folks, including compliance officer and one annuity provider, a big insurance carrier. And they said that the regulators have given them the green light to load up on the stuff without having to reserve the capital that they normally would. Like if you're a pension or an annuity, you want to load up on a Treasury bond, you don't have to reserve a lot of capital against that because they're guaranteed to pay it in nominal terms. But of course, your liabilities are in nominal terms also, so you're fine, you're hedged. You want to buy something with a higher yield, um, that then you have to reserve capital for it. So the problem is all these they're sitting on big paper losses, right? Capital losses on all the bonds they bought that were supposed to be safe. And they're looking to recapitalize themselves. They're looking to fill that hole in their balance sheet. And the regulators will go ahead, it's another 3% point to buy that junk stuff, and we will be aggressively indifferent to you choosing to do this time. And that's his theory. And the more that I think about it, it has to go to market to go buy the paper, and not just if they're the sole buyer, then everyone else is the seller. And the optics of that look bad, and ultimately override. Unless they want to grow their balance sheet a lot more than I think they do. But if you get everyone else with the link, and you get the regulators on that, so there's the insurance and annuity regulators, winking and saying, go for it. The Fed, and there's an implied guarantee. Look, if you need to sell down, the Fed will buy it off. But whoever has managed it, I think part of the solution is found private market participants or natural buyers with the right amount, shall we say, government incentive.
Well, that sounds to me like quantitative easing really on steroids, because it's not only the Fed buying debt, not only the Fed buying junk debt, it's the private sector with the backing of the Fed buying debt and buying junk debt. So that's probably where we see. I went and ate a hamburger for Father's Day. It cost me $20 a hamburger. When pre-COVID, it was less than 10, pretty easy. Let's really get that right.
I think that the cause of rising prices, pension funds swap their Treasury bonds for junk bonds. Right?
Okay.
That's if you were to give every consumer, especially the kind of people that don't save any money, go to, let's say, the bottom 50% of the population, have essentially no saving. Whatever they make, spend 110% of it because they'll lever it up with credit card. And you airlift little dollar bills, put them there, and so go spend everything. But the way quantitative easing works is the bank, and then the Fed says we're going to buy that asset off of you. Now, so instead of the bank having $1 billion worth of Treasury bonds, now the bank has $1 billion worth of Fed reserves.
Right. Got it.
Not go and dole out. First of all, you can't. Fed reserves actually aren't even spendable anyway. Different bucket of what we call money with credit, and it's not fundable with any other credit in the economy anyway. Even living that aside, the last thing the bank's going to go do is spend a balance sheet. When the Fed buys that particular asset off, the bank turns around and buys another asset. That's what they have to do. They're a bank. keep a certain amount of reserves, and everything above what they don't want as reserves, they buy something else. And the net result is the asset price is rising, and everyone, including the bank, profits from rising prices. Can take some of that gain and spend it, but not the massive force for rising prices, people assume it to be. But what it is in this case is a massive force for delaying of the next crisis. And I say delaying, I mean, you can't really prevent it, but the longer you bottle it up, the more pressure builds, and eventually it becomes explosive. And, the question is, I mean,
Yeah. So then my question would be, to lead in all of this, would be, why is the dollar still so strong relative to everything else? Because like the ECB just announced an easing, if you would, or a bias, just 2 weeks ago or a week ago. So is it just the reason that the Fed is just in a better position, or why isn't the dollar tanking?
one argument, the dollar's the least dirty shirt, right? And that's true enough. I mean, whatever problems people talk about with the US dollar, in part, biggest currency, so got the most commentary about it. And also, it's the most transparent. The central banks in the world are a lot less transparent about what they're doing with the other government. I mean, you can't really trust any data coming out of China, for example. But that's not the main thing. The main thing is all the other currencies are dollar derivatives. There's not the dollar and other currencies. There's the dollar and then there's local paper script, like
Right.
what a coal mining town would have had in West Virginia in the 19th century. And they don't compete against the dollar. They derive their value from the dollar. So in my view, de-dollarization is when all the dollar juice is sucked out of them. And then, when the Zimbabwe dollar finally de-dollarized, it was worthless and it was discarded. I actually regret, I was at I think it was Freedom Fest 2009, and there was some booth that was giving away the 100 quadrillion Zimbabwe dollar notes, which are, real currency in Zimbabwe at the end. I got it and I put it in my goodie bag, and I was like, you know what, this is garbage. I threw it out with the rest of my, stuff in the hotel room. Now those things are selling for 20, $30 on eBay as commemorative. I was like, oh, man, I still kept that little piece of history. But, the other currencies are really going down against the dollar because partly they're lower quality, but partly when, credit conditions tighten, the most stress is felt at the margin. And the margin is going to be in the other economies that aren't officially dollarized, but the dollar still drives the world economy. And so, every major producer, whether you're in Europe, whether you're in Asia, whether you're in, the Middle East or whatever, has borrowed dollars. So if you want to know what really keeps the value of the dollar up, is every producer owes them. And when you owe, dollars, you have to do something. You have to produce enough to dump that stuff on the market to raise enough dollars that net of all your expenses, which, remember, costs are going up faster than revenues. Net of all your expenses, you have enough dollars left over to service your debt. If you don't have dollars, then you default, and then there are consequences to defaulting. Even if you're too big for the bank to, foreclose on you, you're a sovereign or whatever, your access to credit dries up, and you're really in a bad way. And everybody from, domestic American, producers to, foreign producers, foreign governments, everybody in between are scrambling to get dollars. The Fed has made dollars much more dear in this 5.5% interest rate environment. And so the scramble for dollars, it's not that anybody wants the dollar to go up or anybody thinks it's going to go up or thinks it should go up. It's just that's what happens as a consequence of making dollars harder to get, is people bid on them.
Right.
They have income in euros, but it doesn't take euros to service that debt. It takes dollars. Dump the euro, buy the dollar, service the debt. That's what you do.
Yeah.
So it's a very perverse world.
Yeah.
Work the way, quote unquote, ought to.
Yeah. No, that's well said. I just kind of straddle the fence when it comes to de-dollarization or I should say dollarization. It's just, at the end of the day, though, I just think, what then? Because the whole system is based on dollars. And so to de-dollarize, the whole system would have to change. And I'm not sure. I mean, maybe eventually, but this moment right now, I think that's too monumental. I just think it's too monumental.
Examples of an entire global system changing overnight. All right. That's how, social things work. The term that economists would use for this is network effect. The dollar has cemented the network effect, and no paper currency can, and you're not even remotely close. And if you know Jeff Snyder, I had him on my podcast, we were talking about, and I said, the other currencies are dollar derivative, and so on. And he said, a percentage. So there's about not quite a quadrillion dollars, approaching that, of derivatives.
I can't even think about that high. Yeah.
It's a stupefying number, literally. So he said, what percentage of derivative contracts have the dollar on at least one side? I said, well, at least 90%. 90%. So basically, there's the dollar, and that's it, full stop. There isn't really anything else that, even in the same room.
Yeah.
And only one thing can replace the dollar, and that's gold.
Yeah.
And that's nobody. I mean, even half the gold bugs are kind of the free gold, view. They don't really want gold circulating money at a monetary system. They want a paper currency where gold is going up in terms.
Right.
You get profits, right? You buy gold, it goes up, and you sell it, and you get more consumer goods. But nobody on either the left or the right or the center, the so-called market monetarist, anybody else in mainstream economics wants anything to do with any kind of gold standard. The number of people that want a gold standard, let alone that we agree on what that gold standard would be, but the number of people that want a gold standard, a rounding error, 0. Effectively, we're a tiny little ragtag group of us. And so are we going to have a gold standard? Well, monetary metals, the whole business is that if you pay interest on gold will come to market. And it's working. So if we can scale it up, then, and we are scaling right now. We've equity capital, we've raised debt capital, we issued our own gold bond. We have a 12% silver bond right now to finance a miner. It's open right now for anybody. And we're paying interest. We pull the metal into the market. So in the case of silver, you can imagine a lot of people have closets somewhere in their house or their basement where the silver bars are stacked up. Silver is very bulky, not only valuable than gold, twice much bulk for the same mass, and then 80 something to 1 in terms of which means it's 100 times the bulk of gold value. So what you could have in a gold bar, big, could be a small closet full of silver. And what we're seeing is people are mobilizing that silver and sending it in order to participate in silver bond 12%.
Right.
And so everybody, wants absolute safety and everything else, but at the same time, they want a return. And if you're offering a return, then it's what makes the world go around. So if we can scale this up, I think a good working definition of a gold standard, not a formal definition, but is when anybody wants to can deposit their metal and earn interest on their metal. And therefore, that's when we scale up, because that's exactly what we're doing.
So it doesn't really have to be official.
Yeah, in fact, better off than anything.
Yeah.
The last 3, even in places where the gold standard, even government always has involves some intrusion in money market. Even in places where the competent administrators, there was distortion that came about of that, and ultimately those distortions led to, complaints and problems. So those problems with always more government intrusion, until eventually it became so untenable that for most of the world, they just wanted to abandon gold when the eve of World War I clung on for another 20 years. But, ultimately, effectively abandoned that in 1903. The final nail finally coming 40 later. It really should be a bottom-up entrepreneurial free market. And all you really need is the rule of law.
Yeah.
Giving you my middle on a right to get it. If you won't get it back, well, I have a right back, and I have recourse to court, including ultimately judgment, judgment, you're involuntarily forcing receivership,
Yeah.
right? Liquidate whatever you have to pay me. Once I'm paid, I get away. If you have that rule of law, which we largely do, people complain about how bad the West, I think, time in other parts of the world,
Yeah.
whether it be India, Central Asia, whatever, let alone Russia, let alone China, still largely have the rule of law.
Yeah.
And you can go to court, and, if you have a clear contract, and the contract has been because the contract itself isn't violating the rule of law, violating the law somewhere, contracts are enforceable. And
Yeah.
that's what comes from bottom up standard. One interesting thing about the silver bond, right? So we did the first gold bond, I believe, in 8-something years. This was in 2020. And there was no gold bond after 1933 when Roosevelt broke the gold. Legal to possess gold, he avoided all the gold clauses, including on the bond. I spoke at the Harvard Club, New York. They have all the memorabilia hanging on the walls. And one of the things caught my eye was bond from a railroad circa 1902. I have a picture of it. And later, zooming in, God bless the camera, smartphones, the resolution was such you could zoom all the way in to see all the print on the, frantic script on the front of 3.5% interest, 97 years maturity. Said payable in the language, the standard gold coin, legal tender gold coin, which is pretty, coin at the time. And of course, in 1933, Roosevelt broke and said now payable in, irredeemable government dollars. And, so there's an irony to it. Of course, Harvard is one of the schools that taught that we shouldn't have a gold standard. And some with their capital, that, that's what the time they were repaid the principal in the 1990s, it had been absolutely something.
Right.
But, anyways, silver was effectively demonetized in 1834 by the Coinage Act. Still coined silver, but it undervalued silver's coin. If you had, $1.03 worth of silver, why would you bring it to rent to get $1 coin out of it? You're better off especially if you had a lot of it, you'd ship it to world market. It's worth $1.03. So it was a gold standard, even though I meddled them officially for another, 40 years. It was effectively a gold standard. And so after that time, banks would had gold and not silver. And what the banks, what the lending would have been, and the bonds would have been gold. And now we're doing silver bonds. I think the first silver bond in 90 years.
That's awesome.
Historic moment. All we have to do is more of it.
Yeah.
And recreate this, barbarous relic monetary standard without it being the official,
Yeah.
without any government intrusion in it. And, well, I think we've moved the needle of the world 1 pixel so far. And started. We're flushed up the cash. We got a war chest. We're, going more aggressively to the market now. And, we got a lot more bonds coming, got a lot more leases coming. And change the thing. Crazy as hubristic as it sounds.
No, it sounds like a great goal for me. So Keith, let's end on that. Let's tell us, I'm a big fan of your work, not only your talks, but what you're doing. How can people reach out to you if they want to do business with you? If they want to purchase gold bonds or silver bonds or anything like that?
Come to our website, which is monetary-metals.com. On Twitter, I'm at Real Keith Weiner.
And you responded to me. Oh, thank you for that.
I tried to, I can't always, sometimes the message pick up and I gotta grueling travel schedule. We try.
You do have a busy travel schedule, but I want to thank you so much for making the time for me and for my listeners. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that tune in. You're a great name. But yeah, just thank you for spending the time with me.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thank you.